a document that expresses the ownership of a house. That is a form of currency when it comes to blockchain. And the storage of a value is purely informational exchange, tracking data, data that can be used to analyze employee records. These are the things when you go to think about when someone says currency on a blockchain, it can mean one or all three of them. Usually when they're talking about it's the third one, it's purely about money, but it can relate to the other two. The definition has expanded as the capabilities, particularly the program capabilities of blockchain, have expanded. So we're going to take you back in time a little bit to understand where blockchain originated from.
Let me just interrupt you quickly, Douglas. I did press record at the beginning and realized it hadn't recorded, so I've just pressed it now. Can anybody let me know the purposes of data protection if they don't want to be on a Zoom call that's being recorded, and then we'll be stuck on the Facebook and LinkedIn group later? Thank you very much.
Just show my good side.
If you keep your mouth shut, I won't show any of them.
And Natalie, yes, I'm happy to record it, Natalie. Yes, definitely. Like a physical storage of value is like a gift card, definitely. But a physical storage of value currently is less more of a gift card because a gift card has a monetary value to it. It's more like a document that contains the ownership of a property because the document itself has no money within it, but it pertains to an object that does have value. So you can exchange a gift card, but you can't exchange, say, well, maybe you could, face to face to someone, but you can't exchange the document of property for an ownership of a house to someone else in exchange for a really big gift card. Maybe you could, but I hope that clears that question up. Yap Island used to use these stones. This is the oldest known version of what we call ledgering. And these stones are about 200 kilograms in weight, as you can see. Any transaction where someone bought something with one of these stones, and right now these stones are still used on the island to this day, though cash is the predominant unit. If you have one of these stones that you own one of them, it's worth between $6,000 to $10,000 at the moment. They're still being used all these many, many thousands of years later. And what happened basically was, and I'm going to show you in a village example. This is what we would call their system, and what we use currently today in banking is what we call a centralized ledger. So in this village, every transaction is recorded in a central ledger, and a bookkeeper is appointed, usually someone who's considered trustworthy, and I'm putting air quotes here, within the village to do that. So these stones are, the currency term for them is called rye. So let's say Alice pays Bob 10 rye stones for some goods. Alice goes to the bookkeeper's house and records the transactions with the bookkeeper. That's fine. But just as banks or any organization that deals centrally with money, problems appear over time. There's the cost of fees. There's the availability in itself, both physically of the bookkeeper in the village situation, and also the availability of financial gatekeepers. Corruption happens. Theft can happen as well, particularly when there's a single document that's detailing all these transactions. What if the document is stolen and altered and replaced? And more importantly, when we're thinking about the larger picture when it comes to current banking, it is the problem of the centralization of power and the inevitable bureaucracy, red tape, and, excuse my friends, but BS that arises in a centralized situation. So if we take it forward to a decentralized ledger system, what I call creating trust, the village decides to find a new way. What happens, every family in the village gets a ledger. Alice again decides to pay Bob 10 rye stones for a transaction. Instead of it going to the bookkeeper, she announces it to all the people, all the family that lives in the area. Each family will then check their own ledger and update it. No single family then has more power than any other, and each ledger is kept in check by each other. So if Bob later turns around and said, no, you didn't give me 10, you only gave me 5, every other member of the village can come forward and say, here's the ledger, this is what she paid, and you can't dispute it. Now, this is a very simple demonstration. I mean, yes, in the village example, people could write their own ledgers, but can you start to understand why a distributed ledger, when it comes to data being stored on a blockchain, is far more efficient, far more safe, and far more effective than having a single centralized storage system like a bank, where everyone is almost slaves to a central point. Am I being clear so far?
Yeah.
Okay. A distributed ledger technology as it works right now, and this is where we'll come to looking at nodes, we'll come to look at validation, peer-to-peer network, and the blockchain itself. This simple flowchart will answer those questions kindly for you. So in the beginning, someone requests a transaction, much the same as Alice wants to give Bob 10 Rye. The requested transaction is then broadcast to a peer-to-peer network of computers known as nodes. So that's it. The nodes are basically the individual computers owned within the blockchain network. The network nodes validates the transaction and the user status using the algorithms. The algorithms are dependent on the system. It could be Ethereum, it could be OpenAI, it could be Hyperledger. There's a whole bunch of different blockchains out there. There's private ones, public ones, but let's just, for instance sake, let's say this is an Ethereum network.
So what does, sorry, Doug, I'm really interested in this. What does validate the transaction mean?
Okay, so what they basically do is they check to make sure that, say for instance, that Alice sending the 10 Bob, that first of all, that she has the Bob, the Rye.
Yeah.
I'm calling it Bob because we're going back to English terminology here, but all right. So first of all, it makes sure that that her wallet address, is actually her. Second of all, that her account does have the money in it. And third of all, that she's sending it with an up-to-date, mechanism that's secured and trusted. If any of those checks fail, that process doesn't even kick off.
Okay.
Doesn't work. If it does, if it passes all that checklists, it then gets passed on to the network. So everyone participating on the network is a node within the network. And that was your earlier question, what a node was. And much like the earlier village example, all these village houses here with their ledgers are nodes within this village, except now we're talking about thousands and millions of nodes as opposed to a village of 10 or 15 people. The network nodes validates the transaction and the user status using the algorithms, which has done that. Once it's verified, so it can continue to the next stage, it can involve cryptocurrency, or when I was talking about money earlier and what can be transmitted, it can be contracts, it can be records, any type of information can be transferred.
So this could, and this is why I'm interested in this, because this could be data, this could just be personal data. So this could be a way of maintaining the integrity of data, maintaining security of data and so on. And that's why I think we'll just see this. I mean, it could be Betamax all over again, couldn't it? But I think we'll see this becoming more and more and more mainstream, and just we'll find it everywhere in our banks, in online purchases.
Banking has been transformed already by this system. There is a lot of pushback against it for many reasons. I'm going to give you some modern examples towards near the end where the pushbacks are happening, but I wanted to make sure that people understood this whole flow. So once it's verified, which we get to just at the bottom right over here, the transaction is combined with all the other transactions that are flowing through at the same time. When you're looking at Bitcoin, you're looking at anywhere between, sort of on a slow day, between 5 to 15,000 transactions per second. On a fast day, you're looking at millions of transactions per second. Blocks, once all these transactions hit a certain quota, they come together and form a block. And that block is then added to the chain of blocks that already exist for all the transactions. And that's where we get the term block and chain. So a single block on a blockchain network is not a single transaction. It is thousands or millions of transactions, depending on what the program limits the size of the block is. And then at the end, the transaction is completed, and both parties, one party gets the money out of their wallet, and the other party receives the money in their wallet, all the information in their wallet, or it's deposited into a secure file system, however it's set up. Anything about these steps and what I've covered that's confusing so far?
No, but in the way the internet is a web as it was originally envisaged, which is a lot of connected networks, is blockchain the same then? So you might have one network end to end.
When a blockchain is formed, okay, let's look at some of the current, like the Ethereum network right now is millions of people in different institutions, private individuals, companies operating within the Ethereum sphere. The moment you are using Ethereum, either as a currency for yourself or using Ethereum as it's used mainly today as a programming vehicle, you become a node within the Ethereum network. You are someone who is responsible for maintaining a ledger, and you do this automatically by having the software run in your machine. It's not something you manually have to do. It's done as being part of the network. And what basically happens is we'll come to fees in a second, because I'll show you a little image later how basically the transaction works. But the effort to get the information from step A to step B on an Ethereum network, on every network, it costs a certain amount of transaction, because what we call the miners have to do the work in order to validate, encrypt, and send that information along. So if I send 10 ETH to Chris Fox, I might actually he might only receive 9.998, because a small fraction of it will go towards the cost of the people basically doing these validations of the work, doing the work. Now, you don't necessarily, when you become part of a blockchain network, become a miner. You don't have to do that. You don't even have to necessarily become part of the nodes that validating it. All that does is, in order for you to do transactions on the network, your ledger on your machine must be an exact copy of the entire ledger that everyone has. And when you download, for instance, Bitcoin or like Bitcoin program or Ethereum down, or you create your own multi-sig wallet on your machine, multi-signature wallet, all that happens is it will take a few hours for you to have a hard copy of the entire ledger downloaded on your machine, and it takes gigs these days, huge amounts of space to create it. You don't have to do it. There are online wallets that do all the storage of the ledger online, but we can get into that maybe when we look at currency side. But in terms of understanding how the blockchain flows the information from one side to the other, particularly looking at the village example of trying to simplify what a ledger is, how it works, are we all on the same base now? Yeah?
Yeah, one more clarifying question on it, because
Sure.
I'm really trying to get this picture in my head. So Ethereum would be a village, and another organization might have their own version, or another village might have its own set of ledgers.
Yeah, there are thousands of blockchains out there, and there are different types of blockchain networks too. Ethereum's just one of them. Bitcoin's another one. Hyperledger, and there are different types of blockchain, which I'll get to in a little bit.
Awesome, and that maybe you can answer that question. This question then. So is it possible to jump between those blockchains, those networks, in the same way as we might jump between networks on the internet, or is that actually part of the
jump between them in what sense?
In the sense of portability, data portability, for instance, or purchasing across different.
Yeah, you can use technically when you're wanting to buy Ethereum or Bitcoin or any number of coins. What you have to do is you don't necessarily have to go onto the Bitcoin network to buy Bitcoin or use the information that's on there. All you have to do is go to a trading website. There's a great, if you want to experiment a little bit with cryptocurrency, I'll fire up the web browser in a second and I'll show you. But there are websites here in the UK that once you're certified, as in, because the UK have put in laws in place for citizens to buy cryptocurrency, any trading site worth their salt will ask for a copy of your passport, confirmation of the address, and all the rest of it, and that's for their records. You can then buy. It's counterproductive to become part of the blockchain network if you're just wanting to buy currency. Rather just buy it from a trading site.
Yeah, makes sense.
So you don't necessarily have to jump to network. You just go where the best price is, or if you want to buy it by cash or by PayPal or something simpler, there are websites that do it. The biggest question is,
can I ask one more question about your process? The last step is the one that always bothers me, the missing step. And that is, as you add to the blockchain, does anything ever go away?
No.
So, because I know, if I go to my bank, they'll keep the records for about 10 years, and after that, it's gone. But this thing is this thing is growing exponentially every day, and if we put more and more stuff onto it, surely it just ends up consuming the entire world.
It's growing linearly, though, isn't it?
We're not gonna wake up one day and have entire streets filled with blocks. But no, it essentially, what makes it. Here's the difference between banks and printing money. When it comes to the blockchain, particularly when it comes to blockchains that are focused on currency and transactions, there is an algorithmic limit to how much Bitcoin there can be in circulation in the future. Now, current mining projections estimate that we're looking at the end of the total amount of Bitcoin supply being created by around 2050. Once that happens, there will be no more Bitcoin to mine, and it'll only be Bitcoin in circulation.
So I'm not worried about the Bitcoins as the store of value. I'm worried about the transactions. So every time I give some Bitcoin to you or vice versa, there's got to be a transaction added to the blockchain.
Yes.
And in 1,000 years, there's going to be gazillions and gazillions and gazillions. Are we going to spend the rest of our life building hard drives or whatever storage devices we're using to store all of these transactions?
No,
so we can go back 1,000 years and see where that came from.
No, because as I said, the blockchain, the distribution of the information can be done in two ways. 90% of the people who are operating within the blockchain, who are buying and spending and using Ethereum as a currency, do not download the entire transactional chain or the entire blockchain itself to their own machines. That only happens if you want to create a hardware wallet for yourself, and that will then download the entire ledger to your machine.
But even if only one person had the ledger, it's still going to carry on growing indefinitely forever, isn't it?
Technically, yes. But what happens is, what you're thinking of is, you're thinking that it's going to grow to an exponential size in terms of data size.
Yeah.
A blockchain that from the beginning of Bitcoin, when Satoshi did the initial publication, that was what, 30 plus years ago, to right now, is a total of around 2.5 gigs worth of data of all transactions. Because a transaction, what it looks like is, first of all, it's encrypted. Second of all, each transaction counts to around about 10, maximum of 10 lines of text, encrypted text, SAHA text.
Yeah.
That's it. So you can stick around about 20 million, if you want, transactions into a block, and the total size of that block might be 5 megs.
Right.
6. So, storage is never going to be a problem now, and particularly in the future. We don't have to worry about storage problems, considering how much excess storage we have right now anyway, disposable.
Right.
It will never be an issue.
Okay. That kind of blows my mind, but I'll take it as read for now.
Well, if we didn't do that, if there was an age time limit set on the currency transactions, the whole principle, one of the core principles for having an immutable chain of transactions falls apart.
Yeah.
So, by necessity, the focus is on compression, on encryption, and on immutability, so that no one can ever be messed around. There are ways to hack it, but it's extremely, extremely difficult. We'll get to that. The biggest question facing at the world, and this is a slight spin-off, but should inform your thinking, is either to centralize, as we've always done for many institutions, and this is more towards how blockchain thinking, blockchain cryptocurrency, and particularly what we call a Merkle tree structure, which is an obscure term for basically how to optimize a business or an information pathway or a data pathway in a correct way, algorithmically. These are questions now that people who work with organizations are facing. Do we continue doing what is optimally done since the 1950s, the 1800s, is build these central organizations? Do we look at how centralizing and decentralizing can happen, or even how distributed organizational structures can happen? And the terms often entertained as decentralization and distributed networks are often torn, because there are differences in structure between certain types of blockchain. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, because that's not the point of this. But I thought it might be interesting for guys here who look at organizations, who work with organizations, to see how this technology has started to affect the arguments about it. This gives you a brief quick sort of neat graphical look at what it looks like when you're looking at it from a node point of view. We've already looked at centralized networks where, you know, all the nodes are connected to a central authority on the left-hand side. That's the single image of a bank. We're all little single dependents pointing upon a central point of authority. A decentralized network, there's no single authority server. There are groups of people surrounded by a node, and those nodes, as you can see, are interconnected. So any transactions done by this group will then ping along all the rest of them and update them. And the final one is a truly distributed network where every node is independent and interconnected with each other. That's getting into the really deep weeds. And those networks are built for really highly, not relating to currency. This is a currency model, the one in the middle. The one on the right is when we're looking at the sort of extremes of blockchain, where you're mining big data, you're using AI, and you're plugging in blockchain's capabilities to combine all three to do things like, one of the biggest projects at the moment is something called the Ocean Network. I had the privilege of talking to the founder a couple of years ago, and basically what he's doing is combining all of those three in order to mine personal data with the ultimate goal of being able for people to have their own personal data licensed to them, and then they themselves can sell their personal data rather than third parties taking your personal data and your shopping data and your tracking data away from you and selling it anyway. You're not profiting from your own actions, they are. Their focus is to take a deeper control, take it away from them, and bring it back to people. If you ever want to look it up, it's called the Ocean Network. And this is where it gets a little bit deep into the weeds, but when I was talking about organizational structures, you can see the pros and cons when you're looking at modeling a business over something that's more decentralized or something that's more centralized. Yeah, Natalie and Tony, that's absolutely right. That's the problem technically with centralized businesses is, yeah, they're monolithic. There's a single point of failure. And we're all technically subservient to a single authority that has access to data which they can manipulate at will. And this is why Satoshi, and I don't believe Satoshi was a single man, that Japanese man, I believe was a group of people. And that's why they created blockchain and cryptocurrency, was to take away the power of central banks over our lives and give us an alternative. And more importantly, the biggest step they took was to limit the total amounts that could be generated, because money right now is printed when needed. It's almost like an endless IEO. Banks print it as they need it for whatever needs, whereas Bitcoin's value, how many coins will be in circulation, will end in about 30 years, and that will be it. So, and once that happens, then it's more about the value increasing by those who hold it, those who sell it, and the use. So anyway, I'm not going to cover too much at this point, but I just thought you might like to have a flick through and see where these tie in to maybe either your business as you approach. I know some of you here are involved in working with organizations and helping them to develop themselves better.
It's fascinating actually, because back in the day, and it was a long time ago, I did my marketing postgrad. My dissertation was actually on centralization versus globalization versus localization as it was then. So I did a whole piece on the argument between these two types, looking at car dealers actually as the media for it. It's fascinating. It's going on at this level, but we don't have a comparison there between the distributed model. Is that coming up, or is that?
Well, there are efforts. There's a great company in the Netherlands, if you want to have a look them up. They're called PartUp, P-A-R-T-U-P. I worked with them for a little while, and they're applying decentralized models to organizational structures. It works optimally in a startup to scale up situation so that you can build that organizational modeling from the bottom up. But it's basically taking the approach of less horizontal top-down decision-making to more autonomous vertical decision-making. And but there are cons to even decentralization. I mean, as it clearly shows.
And distribution.
You want to, yeah, I mean, talent deployment for one thing is a very big thing, because in a truly distributed model, there'll be more people with a say in what is happening, which will result in a slow amount of time to make the decision making, because everyone's got their bloody point and has to make it and has to get their little, ego across. Whereas slower decision making happens in a centralized system versus with more autonomy, projects happen faster, decisions happen more faster when you've got more groups with more responsibility allocated to them. So this is just something to think about when you think about where blockchain may seem to be an abstract concept where there is a core group of people that are highly interested, and yet the thoughts and the thinking behind it are infecting all the other sort of mediums that are around it, organizational structures, the way we look at sustainability, the way we look at recycling. We'll get to that. So a simple breakdown, what I think what makes blockchain interesting. It's open. Anyone can access it. It's immutable. It'll never change. It can only get stronger. It can only be developed. The code is out there for free. It is completely open source. So anyone can look at it and take it and say, right, I think I can build this slightly better. And there are so many forks of blockchain and Ethereum. They're innumerable. There's hundreds and thousands of them as people do it. It's borderless because it's on the internet. It's completely neutral / agnostic. Particularly, it's wealth agnostic, which I think is really important. You don't have to have, hundreds of thousands of pounds in your bank to get better treatment from a bank than someone who's only got a couple of thousand in their bank. You don't get better services or a better quality of service because of how wealthy you are or how well-known you are. You get the same level of quality, service, speed, whether you've got one Bitcoin, 0.1 of a Bitcoin, or thousands of Bitcoins, or whatever you're talking about. It's decentralized, which makes it extremely, difficult to hack. Never mind the fact that since everything is encrypted, it cannot be censored. There was a test done a couple of weeks ago, I think it was by IBM, where they tried to decrypt using their I think it's Big Blue version 3 they're running at the moment. Their big sort of supercomputer cluster they've got, the fastest in the world one, the one they're using for COVID modeling. And after 3 weeks of solid crunching, they still couldn't break one single transaction. So it just goes to show you just how difficult it is for governments to get into things, which is why, banks and governments want to crush it, because it is very open, but at the same time, what you're doing with your money is very secret. Now, there are ways to track it back. Like I said, if you're buying a Bitcoin or trading a Bitcoin on a registered trading platform, it can ultimately lead back to you, because you will buy the Bitcoin, it'll go into a temporary wallet on the trading platform, and then you will send from that wallet to where it's going. There are some ways to get around it. One of the greatest tools out there right now is what's called a coin mixer. And that's basically what it does is, if I want to send money to Tony, but I don't want someone to know where Tony got that money from, I will send it to a central, what's called a mixer, a coin mixer, and it will combine transactions from Chris Roberts, Ian Edwards, Ursula Young, Natalie Burns, all together. It'll mix them all up, and then it'll spit mine out with snippets of other codes from them too. So what arrives at Tony's destination will be the money that I own, but it won't come from me. It'll be all mixed up. And the FBI hates these places. They want to shut it down. Because yes, lots of people are doing it for normal trading because they want to be as private as possible, but you can imagine cartels, drug organizations, all the rest of it are using that too. But that's why I love blockchain so much, because it's got that sort of wild, wild west freedom of the original internet there. It reminds me of the original bulletin boards and sort of MySpace. It's developing as we speak. It is technically the wild, wild west, and I love it. When we're talking about blockchains and alternative coins to Bitcoin, there's right now, as of this count, there's 1,800 plus what they call altcoins and what we call SHIT coins, truly, in block speak, and counting. Some of them are pure currencies. So Dash, Monero, Litecoins is very popular. Ripple is becoming increasingly popular, especially since the US Navy is becoming involved in that. Some of them represent company or project shares, and I mean actual shares in a company turned into currency. That's Steam, Augur, Decent, Economy, etc. And some are just purely platforms like Ethereum. And the best way I could think of describing Ethereum was imagining a public cloud for programmers. That's what Ethereum does. It allows you to build smart contracts, which are basically programming contracts that will activate a set of instructions once a certain set of conditions are met. So you can have, going back to my previous history, with PayPlus, what we did was we enabled that when someone bought something through a store running the PayPlus app, it would immediately create on the PayPlus blockchain not only a immutable receipt of purchase, but a 2-year or a 3-year or a 4-year, whatever it was, warranty as well, automatically on the chain, so that no one could dispute that the good was purchased, what the warranty was, and how long it was for. And even if the goods were resold, the second person who held that good and it was still under warranty could then claim that warranty, because the warranty would always be there. It wasn't a piece of paper, it was embedded on a chain and it had an address, and there was a simple lookup. That is a smart contract, and all we did was, I didn't write the smart contract, but the developers wrote the smart contract, put that in, and every time a sale happened, the smart contract enacted that and did all those steps automatically. That's a simple way to describe a smart contract, but you can do a lot more complex things with those. Sorry, yeah?
Hi, can I ask a question? Don't judge me, because maybe a dog question.
There's no judgment.
Can you go back one slide, please? So this, like you said, imagine them like public cloud, okay? So if I think of Bitcoin's like a little cloud, and I'm in a cloud, and in it, it's got 19 trillion coins,
yeah,
right? And then people can go and get the coin, and it's $1,100 or whatever for a coin. And then when the coins are gone, they're gone, right? Now, this is what I guess it's conceptually I struggle. Like the banks, you know, they've got money machines, and they're literally, you can't see me now. I'm like, I wish I had video and you could, I shuffling money. They like print money. Okay, so I understand where it comes from. Where does it come from? Like this magic cloud of money. I don't understand where it comes from. Does someone just make it up?
No, that's a really good question. Okay, so first of all, that magic cloud that you're talking about, that is the way the banks have operated all over the world before we get to the coin side, since they dropped any standards that relate to a currency, since they dropped the gold standard, the diamond standard, the oil relating to it. Right now, money exists as an IU. There's a great video on YouTube that's about 45 minutes long, and it describes the creation of cash money from the beginning to what it is right now. And basically, it's a scam that the governments run. We all rely on it. We all use it because we all agree that £1 is £1 or £10 is £10. But in actual fact, the real value of the £10 is something far less. And we don't really know what the value is, but we go with it. And because we all accept that and the markets accept that, life continues as normal. The difference between Bitcoin is the way currency is generated from Bitcoin is that there's a huge algorithmic block. It's a block of really hard code that has to be what we call mined. So there are people out there from the beginning since this was launched running algorithmic attacks against this block. And every so often it will release a string, what they call a string block, which essentially turns into a number of coins that become available into the Bitcoin market. That block has been slowly decreasing and decreasing. And as it decreases, obviously the value of Bitcoin goes up, plus the supply and demand factors obviously affect the price of Bitcoin too. And what's great, what makes people so invested in Bitcoin and believe in it is because once that huge block, which is now kind of a medium-sized block, disappears altogether. And by the way, the further you get into mining the block, i.e. the smaller it gets, the harder it is to generate more coins. In the beginning, they were generating thousands of coins a day. Now we're down to maybe 5, 6, 10 coins a day being generated by hundreds of thousands of miners across the world using, machines filling warehouses, decrypting it. Once that block of currency disappears, that will be it. That will be the total supply of the currency, and it will be the end, not the end of Bitcoin, but there will be no more of it. And that will be the total supply of currency in circulation. And thus, it will be purely governed by supply and demand, not as opposed to money, where there is no end to the money. It's simply printed as the government needs it. Basically, the government writes an IOU, the Bank of England cashes that IOU, even though it goes nowhere, and prints the requisite amount of money, and that money is flashed into the economy. That's why markets tumble, that's why Greece fell, that's why Italy fell. It's a combination of those factors, where technically there is no substance to the money that we're using these days whatsoever. Whereas Bitcoin has a basis, it has a limitation. Once the limitation ends, the coins exist, and they exist permanently. They cannot be destroyed, they cannot be thrown away, they cannot be recycled. They exist, and the value attributed to them is dependent on the market dishes that create it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's big, isn't it? Mind-blowing. Thank you.
Sure. We can get into a deeper conversation about it if you like, but I will try and find that video for everyone here about cash, because once you watch it, you will understand why there's so much attraction in coins.
So, Doug, just to be a pedant about it, the belief in Bitcoin is also what keeps it afloat, right? So, our belief in cash, and you can argue law and order, politics, shops, anything sort of sub-anarchy is what keeps them alive. If we all clap, then Tinkerbell will live. And if for whatever reason we all fall out of love with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency generally, stop believing in it, will it not lose its value in the same way?
There is that argument, yes, that one day suddenly people are going to be suddenly not interested, not just in Bitcoin, but Ethereum and Ripple and Dash, instead of the top 10 established. What this chart is an old one to show you. I thought some of you might catch the fact that the price listed there is a very old price. It's from 2016. Right now, it's about $10,000 for a single Bitcoin. And the market cap is a little bit bigger.
But what I'm trying to say, it's a futures market, isn't it? Cryptocurrency is basically a futures market.
But the belief that we put into cash has got far less backing when you're looking at it from a purely neutral perspective than you do when you're looking at what a digital currency is because it is backed up by, again, as we say, this entire blockchain ledger, which has been monitoring all the transactions. It's available to everyone. In fact, in countries where right now, where the cash is useless, places like Zimbabwe, Botswana, particularly, I mean, obviously the South Africans here, like myself, know these countries. The cash is so ridiculous. It's a bit like Germany after World War I, where people were traveling around in trolleys carrying huge barrelloads of cash to buy a loaf of bread. They prefer payments from their companies and the companies charging the government and the employees working for the companies in Bitcoin because it is more stable than their own currencies themselves. And it's getting to the point where the Dubai 2030 project will establish Bitcoin as one of the national currencies for that country. It is moving towards that projectile because it has none of the fallacies associated with it that fiat cash does. And it's also not affected by all this nonsense micro trading, which has poisoned the trade market as well. Sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, quick question. So the technology, get it, but confidence. We got people like Rajua Ignatova, who's coined the crypto queen because of the scam.
Yeah.
That took place in 2006. How is that impacting the take-up of this technology, Doug, and impacting people's ability to trust it? Because it's about trust again, isn't it?
No, definitely. And that's why I hope this is not going to bother you too much about that. That's why I labeled the 1,800 plus altcoins as, excuse my French, and this is the only time I'm going to swear, but they're shit coins, because people are creating coins right, left, and center for all sorts of ridiculous projects that never exist and never materialize. And it's something I'd like to go into deeper, particularly that particular example that you gave me, in maybe something that's focused on Bitcoin and currencies.
And cryptocurrencies, yeah.
It's quite a good one. I'll put a link into the chat, because there's a great BBC podcast on that for anyone who does want to have a look at it from another perspective.
I know the story. I mean, for people who want to hear it, definitely stick any links in, like Natalie's done. But I know the example that you give me, and here it's where the effect is. For the traders and for the people who know the technology, it doesn't really affect them at all. What it does do is piss us off, because all it does is it pushes people away who are already afraid of this technology for the complexity that it challenges them with. Particularly blockchain as a challenge, and particularly the coins, they don't understand how it has this value, as it does have a value. Where does it exist? Because it's not cash in my hand or cash I can get out of it. And yes, there are ATMs popping up all over the world where you can convert your Bitcoin into cash right there and draw it out. That is happening. And yes, Facebook should be rolling out. They've stopped doing, there was going to be a Facebook coin. They've stopped doing that. But the Winklevoss twins are bringing in a system that is working with IBM and a whole bunch of other partners that will make coin spending just as fast as fiat spending. And basically scams like that, all they do is they make the adoption to mass adoption of this acceptance delayed. All that does is it pushes it back. And yet, when you look at the number of banks that have been hacked, number of transactions that have been wrong, the unethical dealings that are happening with banks and large trading organizations, it's a wonder people bank with banks anymore from what they've done over the years. And yet people are pointing fingers at cryptocurrencies and going, well, how can we trust it? How can you trust the banks that we're using? Because we're forced to.
I think there's a great lesson there, though, in transformation and change generally, isn't it? It's way easier to accept the status
everything
quo.
on the blockchain and everything with crypto is out in the open. There were a lot of people who were not fooled by that scam because they looked into the contract and looked into the chain for it and tried to warn people about it.
But I think
no one
that people they link the two things. They think cryptocurrencies are Bitcoin, right?
Of course.
Sorry, it is blockchain, right? It's been inextricably linked in lots of conversations early on. Coinage was via blockchain. So, you know,
and that's why I started with 3 points.
You missed that bit at the beginning, but yeah, that's absolutely the case.
Yeah.
But the same thing applies to me. I find this whole mass delusion fascinating, and especially on the perspective that we effectively gladly partake in it, right? Because I believe it comes from the same roots as our complicity in language, for instance, right? Because when we learn how to speak, we learn words, labels, and we learn philosophical concepts that have been handed down from time immemorial, right? But it's all the same kind of con. It's the same kind of con, right? I appreciate that we're now talking massively different perspectives here, but we all agree that blue, your text there will be blue. None of us know actually what we're seeing. It's a wavelength of light, if you want to talk about it from a physics perspective. And the chances are, because of the biological interfaces, that we're all going to actually see whatever C is. We're all going to see it slightly differently, but we've all agreed that when we see that wavelength and it creates that response, we'll all call it blue. So there's nothing to stop me from going around saying, well, I'm not going to call it blue anymore. I'm going to call it pirate. And I'm going to change all the labels in my language. And clearly, I don't, because nobody would understand a word I said and I wouldn't be able to communicate. Same thing goes for money. The police is really a fantastic version of this, authority generally.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that, you're a crowd, particularly in the UK, because we're still relatively well behaved, I think. You go along and a couple of police might be there and might say, hey, clear up. When I was a kid, drinking cider in the park, and you'd look up and there's a Bobby there and he's threatening to tell your mum. Off we went. It's only because we all buy in we all agree to run by the same delusion. It's almost Nietzschean, you know. It's even before that.
It's collective trust and collective belief in the agreement to be civil and what it demands of the civil society. And
when you don't have alternatives, then that means
there is alternative.
Before we get off track, I don't want to waste people's time who have to leave. I'd rather just finish this up, and then we can have a chat about police and all the rest of it if you don't mind. You asked about the different types of blockchain. There's primarily three. There's public, which is generally used for crypto coins, so Bitcoin, Ethereum. There's consortium blockchains. R3 is probably one of the best examples. That's around 30 plus companies coming together to form a financial and sort of currency basis together. The access to the blockchain is dependent upon who you are, within the consortium, and what or B, if you're outside the consortium. And the thing with blockchain is you can set the access to the nodes per person or per organization or per department. It all depends on how well structured the smart contract that governs each of them. And finally is the private blockchain. So organizations that run their own blockchain for whether it's using for information, whether it's using for internal currency, whether it's using for any sort of purpose that's relating to storing information. And you know, Iris Industries and Multichain are you know, two of the biggest that are well known. When it comes to blockchain in finance and banking, is, you know, we've been talking about it here, but will blockchain technology revolutionize the banking industry in the same way the internet disrupted the media industry? Because the internet completely took the media industry for a turn. You know, DVDs died. Betamax, calling back earlier, died. R3, which I mentioned in the previous slide, sorry, it's not 30, it's over 80 of the world's financial institutions, regulators have joined together. Their focus is looking at, and all of these points are at a global level, how to do through a combination of blockchain and traditional banks, payments, know your customer and anti-money laundering and records management, asset management, including turning sort of traditional assets like property and housing into coins, which can then be sold, and people with the coins can get profits from. I mean, that was the basis for two of those successful IOs I ran in 2019. Smart contracts in terms of the automation of legal agreements when coming to a deal, automated payments that relate to those legal agreements. All of these smart contracts, they can be very complex things that have a number of features that kick in dependent on condition, much like a very sophisticated programming that spits out information depending on what's happening. It's just done on the chain, and it's recorded and it's certified, and it's also immutable, as opposed to an open programming running on maybe a private server on a government or a private corporation that can be hacked, and then that program changes. That's why, again, blockchain offers that much more security, because it's built on the basis of immutability, but importantly, cryptographically encrypted. And finally, issues of credit, factoring, credit insurance. This is a really big sort of world-changing organization, these group of institutions working together, and they will have, right now, Forbes estimates the biggest impact on whether there will be a tipping point of us moving as societies, particularly in the first world, into a more decentralized financial institutions rather than the sort of top-down that we have right now. For those of you who are working with government services, this is, you know, the central point for blockchain for government. This is where governments are looking at the moment how blockchain can help them. I'm not going to focus too long on the picture because there's quite a few points, but it'll be in the video for later. I think it's really exciting, blockchain for governments, because it can deploy a whole number of services, primarily cheaper, far better accessible to scale, and most importantly, transparent. Whereas right now, a lot of what government does is not transparent. Interesting enough, what people don't seem to instantly connect to, but once they realize it's quite a clear connection, is blockchain and how it applies to the logistics and supply chain industry. you know, as I say, it has the potential to transform the whole of it, particularly how we market, purchase, and consume goods. There's some pretty good examples here. Celista is a company that's focusing on blockchains that track a product's journey and a business's impact on both the environment and society. It's looking at it from a sustainability point of view and from a green point of view. Carnes Valadides is actually a government-sponsored program in Argentina, which is one of the world's biggest producers of meat. And what it does is it tracks meat production from the cow to where you buy it at a shop. And right now in Argentina, in certain stores, sorry?
It's okay. I think that might have been my...
So in Argentina, you can actually, there are actually ID codes at the back of some of the meat. It's focused on pork at the moment, where if you scan the pork in an app that they've developed, it will show you where that meat came from, how it was transported, where it came from, and who was the person that sold it to the store. And that relates, and one of the biggest problems in the world, obviously, like we know of, is these sweatshops that are producing clothes made by children in terrible conditions. Luxo is a really great company. It's founded by a guy by the name of Fabian, who was one of the original Ethereum writers for smart contracts. And he and his wife are basically tracking clothing production from source to sale. And they're working with some of the biggest companies like Nike, Adidas, etc., to make sure that, you know, everyone kind of just under their breath mutters that, you know, that's a shoe that was made by children in some poor factory and you shouldn't buy it. Well, now what they're doing is forcing these companies by putting their entire logistics, supply, and manufacturing chain on a blockchain to make sure that so that when you buy the shoe, the ultimate goal is that within the year or two is that, much like the meat example, you can scan a barcode and you'll be able to tell right up front who made the shoes, where it came from, how it was transported through what countries, and how it ended up where you got it right in your hands from there. And I think that is a complete game changer for how we deal with disposable fashion. And hopefully it'll have an effect on why fashion is so cheap, and particularly what a mess it is when it comes to the huge piles of discarded clothing that are clogging up, you know, sort of the rubbish chips across the world. The last example, before I take the question, if you don't mind, is blood diamonds are one of the biggest problems currently in the third world, particularly in Africa. And De Beers has got a massive blockchain going where all the diamonds that are coming into their system now, because I was quite astounded by this, every diamond is unique, like cryptographically and identifiably unique from each other. Just like they say, what's the cute old phrase? No ice...
Snowflake.
No snowflake is the same. Well, literally, there's no single diamond that matches another diamond. So each of them are scanned into the blockchain. And then they're also putting barred diamonds in the blockchain as well, so that when a purchaser thinks, or even, you know, wants to double check that they're acquiring something from a source, they can access the De Beers blockchain, scan the diamond in through, they've got a custom scanning app that they've built for these, and it will instantly identify whether they're a clean diamond, where they came from, what was the source mine, or whether it was a blood diamond, which conflict, and what authority to contact. I mean, these are some of the big changes that are happening around the world because of what blockchain offers. And I think it's amazing that it's all happening on the quiet, and yet here we are today, still sort of questioning whether it's having an effect, or if it's a good thing, or if it's a fad. It's not a fad in many ways. Sorry, the question someone had.
Sorry, Douglas, I was going to ask you, if we go back to your shoe example, does that rely on someone verifying that the person who made the shoe, before it's registered on the blockchain, the person who actually made it was actually over 18 or whatever?
So the reason I know a little bit more about Luxo is because I've spoken to the founder a couple of times. He's a friend and a connection. And what they've done is they've partnered with UNESCO. And what they do is they send out these UNESCO people who are basically paid to be, or they'll hire people on the ground that work for organizations that do this, like watchdogs locally. And they will make sure that they're there at the factories producing it, and they're the ones that are entering the data of what's going on within those factories. They're not relying on the manufacturers themselves, otherwise that would be a complete lie. There are validated third parties monitoring at the production source, the packing source, because they're also using children to pack up all these boxes and making the manufacturing for it. The shipping and logistics for it, is it sustainable?
But someone is physically checking before it goes onto the system, and I presume once it's on the system, you could switch the shoe for another one. But somewhere there'd be a leakage somewhere, because
it would be very difficult judging from how we describe the system, but there is a percentage chance of corruption no matter what system you discuss. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a physical good, and someone can cheat when they match the physical good to the electronic record.
Don't worry, Peter. Thank you for sticking with us. Just a quick little graph that shows that almost every vertical is ripe for disruption, depending on what the blockchain offers. From what digital currencies do, record keeping in terms of the permanent ledgers, the security that it offers, and particularly the smart contracts. You've got digital rights, escrow, you've got P2P lending and microfinance, healthcare, ownership, voting, crowdfunding, debt management, private markets where you're not going to be ripped off by payday lenders. Every aspect of the blockchain and its unique features has been examined by industries and is changing them to a smaller or greater degree, or being ignored by the very large players to the point where maybe they become dinosaurs because they don't take the same approach. That's my personal opinion / hope, because as you can probably tell by now, I'm a pretty big enthusiast. In terms of blockchain platforms and providers, the sort of the big names, if you want to have a look into, going onto their websites, seeing what they're doing, maybe getting your finger in maybe becoming a node, playing around with some of the easy programming. Hyperledger and Ethereum are two of the most popular and the most easy to get into if you want to have a look into, because if you can do any sort of basic sort of programming, you can get into blockchain programming. It's very simple. It starts out simple. It gets out complicated. There are a number of packages that you can auto deploy that are all, again, open, because like with everything at blockchain, it's open source. So they are certified by the communities being, sort of virus-free and problem-free, etc. They're peer-reviewed. All run off GitHub, and you can deploy, your own personalized blockchain if you want, and test it to see how it works. But there are 5 of them. But yeah, if you're looking particularly at APIs, particularly on the mobile level, then yeah, look at BlockCypher for that level. And particularly looking at the main drivers and the main challenges as to why people are so interested. Efficiency is one of the main drivers. I mean, Santander estimates it's around about 20 billion a year in savings in efficiency for a company that would use versus a standard model working on a distributed model, particularly when it comes to production management, particularly physical goods. It's opening up a whole range of new businesses, which again means more tax for governments, yay, nay. But that opens the way to more loans and to a more richer ecosystem. And I've already just touched on the last part, an improved or richer ecosystem because you can be removing redundant ledgers between banks, regulators, state orgs by putting it on a single blockchain. If you can get them all connected on a private blockchain that they can work on together. The main challenges, however, is it's hard to get a transport company, a producing company, and an end of sale company to collaborate together on a group blockchain. Never mind the decision makers within a single company, you've got multiple decision makers arguing about whether this is good for them, what data can they trust that they can put on there. It took Maersk almost 5 years before they finally agreed to do a blockchain experiment with IBM in tracking their shipping and goods. When now they're saving millions in just waste reduction over the first year of their test. Regulations are one of the biggest problems as it relates to cryptocurrency, not necessarily the blockchain itself, because regulations vary by country and also global. Right now, there is no real sort of global arching oversight of regulations that govern cryptocurrency as it relates to blockchain. There are no regulations against blockchain itself. And obviously integration, tech scaling, technology, the resources to learn the technology, the resources to implement it, and of course, the most expensive of all, time for an organization. The last couple of ones is just a bit of a silly one. This was from 2016. It was Gartner's sort of hype cycle for emerging technologies. And as you can see from the highlighted yellow, blockchain in sort of 2016 was marked as becoming transformational in about 5 to 10 years' time. This is the same chart that put IoT as 5 to 10 years' time, whereas now it's 2020, that's 4 years, and Alexa sort of devices rolling out in 2019. So, don't trust Gartner all the time for their information. But if we look forward and move forward to 2019, we go back to the same sort of data. You can see by the value of the investments in blockchain, yes, it is still over the place. Companies who want more blockchain, a mouth one, please. Consultants, yes, we can. More dollars, please. It's the same sort of in any sort of emerging industry. And the old joke of if you go to a random hotel, switch off the lights, stand in front of a mirror and say blockchain 3 times, 10 VCs will jump out and throw millions of dollars at you. Very bad joke. And has anything really changed in 2019? The short answer is no. This is the sort of the average funding amounts for blockchain. As you can see, for the number of deals that have been done across since 2017 to the fourth quarter of 2019, 2018 was a good year. And the reason it's declined here relates to something called crypto winter that happened in the end of 2017 and particularly at the end of 2018, which I can cover in a currency related one. The final slide is just, these are the biggest 7 mainstream challenges to blockchain adoption, and we've pretty much covered all of them. Budget, egos, decentralization for many is anarchy by any other name, incumbents that are fighting to keep their own, sort of revenue streams intact, their own technology adoptions intact. Infrastructures are pretty old. They're also preparing for, sort of IoT and 5G, which is driving a lot of the revenue at the moment towards people saving towards that sort of expansion. Education is really hit and miss when it comes to who a blockchain experts are, how do you validate that, and simply training for that as well. And finally, the user experience is not friendly for blockchain. It's nowhere near as simple as, say, the standard Windows environment. But these are the challenges that blockchain has to overcome in order to become, as someone briefly raised earlier, more commonly acceptable. That's me shutting up.
So I have a few comments for you, Doug. Douglas, I've got a few comments for you. So we work in blockchain or more DLTs.
Distributed ledger technology. Yep, that's the term I prefer, definitely.
Yeah. So obviously, blockchain is just one DLT, and there are multiple different DLTs that you could use to build on. So we use Hashgraph purely because we work in the ad tech industry. So in terms of speed and reliability for us, it's the best option for the amount of ads that get served digitally across the world at any given time. Scalability is a challenge that all ad tech companies working in the blockchain industry are struggling with.
Indeed.
But, so looking at in terms of consumer mass adoption, as well as investor
confidence,
enthusiasm, not necessarily, not always confidence, but enthusiasm. Most people look at insurance, fintech, and banks as the most common mass adoption platform.
All right, yeah, agreed.
So, but there are so many different use cases. We're working currently with a partner called Acor, and they've built a health check app in the States to track coronavirus, but also to overhaul the US healthcare system by giving everyone an individual health ID. So no matter which doctor you go to, or hospital, or specialist, or consultant, or anything like that, your independent, unique health ID will log all your health records in one place. So there's so many different...
Perfect example of the blockchain done right, yeah.
Yeah, so they've got all the different, there's so many different use cases, but I think the most important is the consumer confidence for mass adoption is nowhere near where it needs to be globally to be able to satisfy the needs to build blockchain on a huge scale.
I blame the messaging. One of the many reasons I entered into blockchain, particularly 5 years ago, was because I was sick and tired of marketers getting into it and having no idea what it was about. They were simply jumping on the bandwagon because, you know, so-called billions and worth trillions in 5 to 10 years' time, so they're trying to start early. I blame the messaging, the way they structured the information, the context, the details, all of that, and how, excuse my French, but effing confusing it was to so many people, and put them off, not just at the industry level, but as you say, the consumer level as well, when it could have been done a hell of a lot more simply and calmly, and we wouldn't have seen such the graph to sort of consumer adoption has stretched huge, when it could have been shortened by a good many years, just with clear content that didn't necessarily dive deep into the jargon, but extolled the virtues.
Well, we've seen that before with other technologies. It's just human nature, isn't it, unfortunately?
I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to too much information can baffle the most basic concept. So when you look back to 2017, 2018, there were huge ICOs going on with thousands of companies around the world, thousands of startups, all selling their own coin and their own ideas,
and then we had the crash.
getting people from all over the world to buy into their concept, and 70% of them have disappeared.
90% of them, really.
Yeah. So you've got people that have lost a lot of money on a consumer basis based on the fact that companies or startups were using it as a way to make a quick buck.
Yeah, shitcoin.
And buy a yacht, you know, in Monaco and live the high life. Unfortunately, that also has had effect and may, for the foreseeable future, have an effect on consumer confidence.
And that's why I am partly pro to more regulatory action, but it needs to be regulation that doesn't quash the best features of blockchain and turn it just into another centralized arm. But at the same time, something needs to be happening in terms of a regulatory body, whether it emerges itself in cooperation with the government, I think would be the best example of that sort of functionality happening, which might reassure and increase consumer confidence in it.
I completely agree. No, it's okay. So
just apologies, Ursula, if this presentation then wasn't worth your time, since you're obviously
no, it was very interesting. You did teach me some things. I'm not going to lie.
Great.
I'm constantly learning. I'm not a tech fundy. I'm a salesperson, but
I'm a marketer, so there we go.
So we've been working with the technology for a while, so I've had to be self-taught. But you know, if you're looking at a regulatory body, you've got in advertising, you've got the IAB. Now the IAB has different branches across the world, but you can only be a member and contribute to the IAB if you pay them.
Yeah.
Now the whole basis of blockchain is open source. So I think that personally, if you're going to look at a regulatory body for blockchain, it cannot purely be for the people who the companies and the blockchains and anybody else who can afford to be a member of that regulatory body. It needs to be open source, like the technology.
Agreed.
That's my 2 cents.
No, I think your 2 cents worth $100.
Douglas, can I make an observation? So setting aside the cryptocurrency things, as you tried to do right at the beginning, and if we just talk about blockchain, do we need mass consumer adoption of blockchain, or do we just need a group of 80 financial services companies to come together and do something on a distributed ledger that gives me a better product at a cheaper price, for argument's sake, and people adopt it? Do I need to know? And the parallel I draw, because when I think about blockchain, the closest analogy I can come is in the early 90s when we first were given the internet, right? No one knows how it works. Yeah. You know, we've got email and we've got the World Wide Web. I mean, I was in technology at the time. Sadly enough, I know exactly how it works, but no one does, right? The fact is, you can send an email or go on Facebook. That's all you care about.
You can use a product without needing to know how the chicken was cooked and baked. I totally get that. And when responding to Ursula's question earlier in terms of messaging, that was one of the biggest problems when going back to what I said about launching PayPlus and getting Samsung, how we did that was not talking about blockchain. We didn't mention the fact that the thing was running on blockchain. All we did was extol the features, but didn't say where they came from. We didn't mention blockchain. We didn't mention any of the technology. All we did was focus on what the product did that other products didn't, and we didn't specify how that was done by. We don't focus on the technicalities. You focus on the positives and what it does, what other products cannot do.
Well, I mean,
I think if you ask,
my thought, on that was, I did the presentation on trust a little while ago, and I think this is about trust. If blockchain truly will improve services by improving trust, and someone takes that to market, then that may be a reason someone uses the services that are underpinned and delivered using blockchain, and that will create adoption. It's just one of the features of a good service that someone will buy into. But it's not about it being blockchain per se, and it's not any particular version of blockchain. If it makes it more secure and reliable, it builds trust. People will, over time, use the services that gives them.
That's why I said it's about the messaging. It's about what you say. You don't confuse people. You don't dump technical nonsense down your throat. You just extol, this is what you're doing right now with X product. You could be doing X plus Y with our product or that product, and not just try it and you'll see it. Thanks, Nigel.
Sorry.
Nigel, you've got the attention. Go for it.
Okay, right. It's quite interesting. In a lot of presentations I've done.
Just wanted to say, I hope it wasn't too boring, because it's. I tried to make.
No. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I'd like to have a chat with you later in the week to talk about an idea I've had.
Oh dear.
One of the aspects that one of the things that I find when I've been doing lots of talks is that a lot of people, especially when in the early days, when you ask people about what their fears were as far as the internet was concerned, and websites and marketing and everything else on the internet, is that they all wanted to know how it worked. And they didn't need to know that, because one of the questions I asked was how many people in the audience had driven to the event that day. All the hands go up, and how many people actually knew how the internal combustion engine worked. And it's a case about the interface and their understanding. They don't need to know how it works. All they need to know is that you can achieve these things from it. And that's something that you said in your presentation, Douglas, that you approach things by not telling people it's been done by blockchain. You tell them this is what you can achieve. This is the sort of thing you can do. And these are the problems you'll solve. And that's what got you through past the influences within the organization. And it was only afterwards they found out you were going to be using blockchain. Now, I don't know what were the reactions after they found out blockchain was being used, or didn't you actually tell them?
What happened was they had built this product on the blockchain, and until I came on board as the advisor, they were selling it as a blockchain product. And so my first piece of advice was toss that all out. Let's focus on the features that it brings that a similar level product cannot do, because it's not built on a blockchain. Remove all the mentions of nodes, transactions, the list of it out of it, and let's just focus on pure feature set and customizability and the branding stuff you could do with it and all the rest of it. And that's what we did. And it was because of a core group of traders and sellers, small traders and sellers, mainly vendors who were marketing on the street side, people with small businesses were using it, and it was cheaper than Stripe or PayPal. We got this groundswell of people using it as a sort of word mouth to mouth as it grew. And then when Samsung and all the rest of it came knocking and saying, well, so many of our customers are using this and we don't quite understand why they're using this. Then we started telling them about the features of the product, and then we introduced the technical guys only to the blockchain side of things. So then they met together, the salespeople understood, the marketing people understood, and the technical guys go, we can explain to you later why it works the way it does. And they got on board for that.
There's a couple of, I'll just check a couple in before we wrap up. I think, Doug, to answer your, or not a question, but it's absolutely fascinating. It's the longest one I think we've had so far. We're well past the hour. But is there an analogy here between the uptake of online? So Chris mentioned earlier the early 90s. it wasn't until everything really fell apart in 2001, the so-called the dot-com boom and then bust, the bubble burst, that all of this stuff actually then, all of it had to work, didn't it? So everybody had a fantastic idea, created a web company or a technology company and got loads of money. After 2001, what they actually had to do was bring user-tested, valid ideas with. It led rise to this whole thing about it just works, doesn't it? It just works. And I think the other aspect, you mentioned it right at the top of your little chart there, the challenges, the user interface is really difficult to get your head around it, very difficult to use. And until, there is a method for it, until there's a tool, Apple and the graphical user interface spring to mind, maybe it won't catch on in the way that we think it will. We don't need to understand it like everybody's been saying, but there has to be a tool that we can use that will suddenly bring the whole thing to life.
I just wanted to say thank you, Natalie. That was a super nice comment. I personally thought I was a little boring, but okay. If you guys
it was awesome.
got something out of it, then great.
It was awful, Doug. It was awful.
Perfect. Thank you.
Like
Thank
me,
you, Chris. That's exactly what I
talking about it yourself.
Sorry, Ursula. I talked over you. What did you say?
If you're like me, you feel like you boring because you talk about it so much to yourself. You don't talk to everybody else. Has a different impression.
This is a bit like you talking about radio, Ursula.
No, more like you talking about radio, Tony.
Touché.
Or Star Wars.
I haven't lost my sense of humor.
No, thank God for that.
We're South Africans. We never lose our sense of humor.
I know you do.
It's the only thing that kept us sane growing up.
The booze helps.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that.
You talk about stereotype you're fulfilling, but you do. This little Zoom call now is you could probably stick a flag in it, couldn't you? It is rather dominated by South Africa.
Does anybody? I'll probably have to stick my name on every page, but do you want me to stick a copy of that in the group? If anybody wants to take a copy.
Well, I'll put the video in for sure. I don't see why we can't share the demo and maybe even not demo. Sorry, Doug, your presentation, and maybe even.
I don't know if it's going to be used to anybody. If anybody wants, it said okay. Rather, if anyone wants a copy, just find me a LinkedIn message.
Yeah, stick it in.
Yeah.
Stick it in.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Really, really cool. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. And if you guys want at some point to do one on particularly Bitcoin and currencies and all the problems, like a sort of mini deep dive like that was, we can do that.
And Doug, you and I were also talking about trying to do one about safety on the internet for everyone.
Yeah, and I was thinking maybe we could do it live, because if I just steal your eyeballs for a second, what I wanted to show you was, I don't know how many of you guys are running programs like these that block trackers, fingerprints.
Yeah, that'd be a great session, actually. I remember you saying about, and I think the data protection aspect, as we touched on earlier, is also amazing.
Particularly the best product, if you want to stop yourself ever pretty much getting hacked on top of running a proper virus, is something like this, which is peer blocked, which is blocking. There you go. You can see just over 1 trillion IPs.
Yeah, with Doug and I have been having a chat in the background. So, Tony, whenever that fits the schedule, then I'm sure we can do something.
Well, we got Richard's on for next week, I think. I suspect I've been a bit remiss. I don't think we've got very much lined up after that, to be honest. So it may be worth going in. Say again?
Aren't I doing the talk?
Oh, no, I crossed you back off.
Oh, okay.
No, you're quite right. You're quite
I thought it was down on the 10th.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get onto Facebook to have a look, because how do I?
Thanks, Stewart. I'm gonna have problems following you.
Yes, actually, you're quite right. So next week is Nigel and customer journey. Then we have an agency perspective with Richard, and I think that is it. So it's probably worth filling up the diary a little bit and getting some promotion out for it, because I think it's well worth. I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? We didn't quite have a full house today. I wonder if the topic actually scared people off a little bit. So we could do a bit of a. I'm completely guessing, Douglas. It could be a number of things, couldn't it? But I noticed Jodie hasn't managed to make it. I know she's doing a course. Prith's not here. There's a couple of people I would have thought would have made it. Chris was late, so maybe we need to do a bit of work to promote these talks a little bit more, make sure, because that is so high quality. Yeah.
That long-haired, arrogant guy who won't shut up talking, so they probably just thought, "No, I'm not going to bother listening."
What with the Odinson?
Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely awesome. Natalie, did you want to say something? Sorry.
Yes, I would love if anybody has any knowledge on crowdfunding. I think that would be interesting. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone in the network has got any experience.
Crowdfunding in what sense? You mean over typical platforms like Kickstarter, that sort of journey, or are you thinking of also the sort of the crypto crowdfunding?
No, just on like SaaS platforms.
I know somebody quite well.
I've only done one Kickstarter project. It wasn't too successful. I was helping someone doing it. It was halfway through. But in terms of being super knowledgeable about it, no.
I think I've got, there's a chap in Swansea who runs a bike lock company, which was born on Kickstarter and has actually launched a couple of products since on Kickstarter. And he's a fascinating guy because he's a professor at the London School of Art and Design. He's actually a designer by trade. So he's terrific. He can talk about all sorts of things. Or maybe I'll rope him in to come and do us a talk on crowdfunding. I think that'd be a really good one.
Doug, there's a couple of people in that other network where I met you, the Founders and Mentors one, who are into crowdfunding as well.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's a shout as well.
I meant to put a message there to say that this conversation was happening today, because there's a bunch there asking me about blockchain all the time. I should have done that. But then, I don't really want to drag them into something that's, we've got a really special group going on here.
Purely selfishly, I quite like that there are so few of us, because we've got to have a proper chat about it, if you know what I mean. We've got to really grill you about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do it for that group and the same session again for them if they want it.
I think you should, like, it'd be really good for your profile.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's good. That would be a good chat, actually. Do that. Good plan.
Okay, I've got to go. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Good to see you, Natalie. Bye-bye.
Bye, Natalie.
Thank you all again. See you next week.
Thanks again, Douglas. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Douglas.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.